Hey, this is Emmy Thomas, and I'm here with Z. I'm going to ask Z the question I ask everybody, which is, what is it like to be you, Z?
It's interesting. It's like whenever I meet somebody, they're kind of like an open book. Um, I have a lot of like both like emotional empathy and cognitive empathy. So when I look at somebody and they talk to me, I just learn a whole lot about that person within like maybe 5 to 15 minutes. Um, so it's interesting. It's kind of overwhelming to like be around people because of that. Um, just because people have a lot going on. Like there's a lot of things that people are suffering from, and there's a lot of that suffering that they carry into their daily lives. And I think it's helped me develop a wider understanding of people in the world. Just more of an interest in alternative ways of living.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Uh, That's interesting. So, does it seem like a burden sometimes? Like the things that you see or know about people?
Yes and no. I think like with everything there are upsides and downsides. Um the upside is just having a window into a person and like into sort of the truth of who they are and who they're trying to be.
Yeah.
And just like not really being able to be taken by some certain lies because of that has been very helpful.
Mm.
Or like just like people who want me to believe a certain thing and try to direct me towards a certain thing, and I'm like, oh, I see you doing what you're doing. And maybe I'll play along, maybe I'll just watch it happen. um Sometimes it's hard because like I just meet a lot of people and I'm like, I don't know if I'd necessarily get along with you because I see all these things about you, and I feel like a lot of people don't go through life like looking at people like this, so they're a bit less picky. um
Huh.
so I think I have like a friend group of maybe like four-ish people, like four-ish close people. it, you know I think that's for the best.
That's interesting. Is there like a story that goes behind the story about people? You said sometimes people want you to see a particular thing and are like trying to get you to see reality a particular way, and you sometimes go along with it and sometimes don't.
Yeah, I think it's like it's never like, well, I can't say never. Usually it's not like a conscious decision for the people that I'm around or watching. Like I think a lot of it is just like masks, like everybody walking forward with their masks very firmly in place. And a lot of times people will like believe that those masks that they have on are them. And so they'll try to portray themselves as a certain way, or they'll act in a certain way. But there's something beneath that too, where it's like, all right, this persona is to cover this certain element of you. You know.
Yeah, I wonder sometimes with the people who like wear masks, like how many of them are like choosing it, versus how many of them. Have you seen the movie Memento?
Memento. Oh, I've heard of it, but I've never seen it.
Yeah, I will tell you quickly the premise. So the guy has like amnesia, and it kind of he basically mentally resets every like 15 minutes or so. It's kind of funny because you'll see him in like some sort of chase.
Hmm, hmm.
And he'll be like, "Oh, I'm chasing this guy." He'll kind of like forget and what he was doing in the middle of the chase. It'd be like, "I'm chasing this guy. Okay, I gotta keep chasing him just from context clues." Then the guy pulls out a gun and shoots at him, and he's like, "Oh no, he's chasing me."
Yeah,
Because he doesn't
got
remember
you.
what happened like the 15 minutes before. So he has all these tattoos that remind him of different things. And the kind of like main plot, this is probably not a spoiler. The main plot is that he is trying to figure out who killed his wife or whatever, kind of avenge the death of his wife, which I think is how he also got the amnesia. in an altercation with this person. But you also see him, and this is probably not too much of a spoiler, you also see him sometimes lie to himself, like get something tattooed that wasn't actually true.
Mm, that's interesting.
Yeah,
That's a
but
very, very interesting
yeah, so
parallel.
yeah, that's what I think about sometimes with people because, for instance, my dad is probably a narcissistic personality disorder. And recently, there's been something here and there. I've gotten in like kind of like business deals with him too, or like whatever thing. So there was something that was just kind of not done correctly, like a while ago, like 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And so I was just asking him, like, how can we fix this now without triggering a tax event, basically? And he's a lawyer
Mm,
too. So I was like, can we do it this way? Can we just amend this, or does this need to happen, or whatever? And then he got like so triggered by the question that uh, he, and I kind of know this from like third parties who saw this. He he sent me this long letter that was like, all these like negative things or whatever. And then even the letter apparently was even more attacking me personally,
hmm
is what I have heard before it got like sent out. It's like a legal letter. I'm just
Right.
getting it from my dad or whatever. But then I haven't even read it yet. I don't read his letters. But then
Yeah.
he also lied to my mom and was like, I had a conversation with her, not long ago where we stood this far apart and she said to my face, "You're a fraud and you have ripped me off and I'm going to sue you for everything that you have." Something like that. And the last time I spoke to him about this deal was probably like over a decade ago. So it's just weird. You're like, in what reality did I stand across from you? And like you wonder, like, is this like how much of this is intentional and how much of this is maybe his like dementia a little bit from being older and from his
Mm,
narcissism? And so it's really interesting because that's like the probably the most kind of overt instance that I have seen of this type of kind of self-delusion. And I wondered, I was like, is this just is he like in his mind? Like what does it look like in his mind? Does it look like
right.
I am lying to my wife because, I don't want her to support her daughter over me, or like is
hmm
is there an awareness that it's a lie? Or is there like a belief like the guy from Memento has? Because after he gets something
Yeah.
tattooed, then he's like, that's my reality, That's like I have no reason to suspect this. And if I start suspecting the stuff that's tattooed on me that I've, left little post-it notes to
hmm
myself to get tattooed, then what do I have? I have like kind of no existence. And that's kind of like what the movie explores
Yeah.
too, is like how do you kind of process reality? So I wonder that about people who wear masks, like when I wore masks, here's kind of a weird thing. When I wore masks, a lot of them were intentional. And I thought, I'm doing this particular thing, or and a lot of it honestly was in response to people like reading people, but like not in kind of nefarious ways that you think. And I still do this
hmm
now. Like there's this person that I interact with who is kind of being like, I was going to say groomed for a leadership role, but now the word groomed seems like
Now I get you primed. Yeah.
yeah, he's being
Yeah.
prepared for like a bigger leadership role and whatever thing, but you can tell that he's nervous about certain aspects of kind of the role. And so
hmm
like when we have conversations about this, I'm actually, I see that about him. I see the insecurity or the I mean, even if it's not an insecurity, it's just a lack of comfort.
Yeah.
Like it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be like a personal whatever, but you can just see that he does not want to engage in this
hmm
aspect of the role. And so when he does, and I have to interact with him because of it, then I give him like all this positive feedback, like you did such a good job, and this was perfect what you did, and great, great insights and great instincts and intuition about this because I'm like, it's easier for me if he actually likes that part of the role because then he'll give it the attention that it needs.
hmm
But it's
Yeah.
also good for him. They want him
Yeah.
to, take on this particular role. It's going to be good for him overall, I think. It's not like he's turned the role down. He's actively, getting prepared for it or whatever. So,
Right.
so that type of thing, like that type of maybe mask wearing, where it's mostly like I'm intentionally leaning in to something, like, positive reinforcement. You
Yeah.
know how people have like the love languages,
Yeah. Yeah.
for my girlfriend, it's positive words of affirmation. And so every
That's
time I
interesting.
see, yeah, every time I see her kind of anything, feel any type of way about something, it's just like immediately like I'm think just flutter with this. Because isn't that the whole point of knowing that about people?
Yeah, like I do that too in some ways, like having sort of a window into people, because like just from listening to a lot of the videos you've posted, like I can tell a decent amount about like your cognitive empathy. And like I think it's, like the ends do somewhat justify the means, like just knowing that you took a specific path to get here doesn't change the fact that maybe I took a different path to get to the same place. Right? Like we're in the same place,
Hmm.
like I think having windows into people can be something that can be used to harm other people, but it can also be used to do what you're talking about, like uplifting other people. And even if it helps you, like it's still net positive, right?
Hmm.
Like,
I don't even look at it that way anymore
huh?
because I don't look at it that way, the net positive. I don't
That's
kind of
fair.
justify it because of that. I have to say that because and maybe it's because it's like, former alcoholic or whatever, former person who disregarded the personhood of others, personhood and autonomy of others so much that now I've just am kind of like completely consent based, So with this
Hmm.
this this guy who's, being prepared for this leadership role, he has accepted to be prepared, and so I feel like I'm then like part of the personal training team or whatever, where I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, like I'm gonna be like 10 more push-ups, yeah, you could do it, and even be kind of like manipulative about it because that's what he asked to do. It's like going to a therapist. When you go to a therapist, you don't want the therapist to not make you different. You do want the therapist to manipulate you in ways that are gonna, make you different, right? Like you go to a doctor, you do all these things where you want to be different, and the person has promised to help you be different. And so in those situations, I still engage in it, and with my partner too, same thing. She has told me like intentionally, like the her love languages, in order for me to accommodate them.
Hmm.
So I
Right.
feel
So like
fine
you,
doing it.
yeah,
But if somebody hasn't consented, if I can't find some way in which they've consented, I don't do it. I can
yeah,
be
that's
nice
very
and I
fair.
can be polite, but I never am more invasive than that. Even though I can be, I could be, but I'm like,
That's fair.
this person
Yeah.
hasn't asked for it.
Yeah, it's like you're very cognizant of the goals, right? Like what you're building towards, what you and this other person are building towards. So like in a relationship, the goal would be like to
No.
have a, well, I
It's
mean
not goal
that's how
oriented at
I
all. Yeah, I
yeah.
see.
Yeah,
Okay.
like to say the goal of a society is to work together in a way that is like helpful to all of its members. Therefore, like we need to provide um like healthcare for X range of people that's accessible. And that would
Yeah,
be a
I
very like
disagree with that, but yeah, it's
no?
interesting that you think that. Yeah.
Really interesting. Okay, what do you think? Well,
I think it's all consent based. I think that it doesn't matter. Uh, and it's interesting too. This is something that I've been thinking about. Well, let me finish this thought. It doesn't matter
okay.
what the goal is. Like, we can't ever do anything without somebody's consent. So my idea is like, if we're always just consent building, like we're always trying to get people on board or for whatever. And there's no goal, because if the second that I have a goal, at least, I start distorting the way that I perceive information, like reality, and
Hmm.
I start distorting the way I interact with people, because the goal twists my mind and says this is what we're trying to do. And so like everything that we kind of perceive and every interaction we have with other people, it has to kind of somehow serve this in some way. That's how my mind
I
thinks.
see.
Yeah, when
I
I think of a
see.
goal. So I have to be like, there's no goal there. The
Got you.
only,
That's so interesting.
yeah.
No, I
Hmm.
understand that. I see what you're saying. Um, yeah, that's interesting to think about.
Yeah.
Like having a goal is kind of like having blinkers on things that don't fall within that goal, I guess. Or like not just blinkers, just like having a river that has to go along a specific channel.
Yeah, it's
Um,
like yeah, that's kind of a good example. Or even kind of like, there it's like wearing Spanx, like body shapewear,
yeah.
where it's like you're forcing the body to do something that it doesn't naturally want to do. And I
Hmm.
always, I used to do that too with my own body, my own body, my own mind, like my soul or whatever. Used to force it to do things that weren't natural to do. In like this way that I
Right.
realized mutilate me, like I am not accepting myself fully. And it didn't really make sense. Like, what was the point of the goal if I couldn't just, be myself 100% of the time? And so I do think this really
Right.
puts me at odds with like maybe like the majority of people who want to be something that they're not. They don't want to be the thing that they are.
I think on the surface level, yes, but I think a lot, a lot of people are pushing themselves into boxes um that they don't necessarily fit into
Mm,
because we have a very, very intense like standard of perfectionism, like
mm,
just in American society, like take art for example, like art needs to look a specific way, it needs to like be done in a way that's visually pleasing. If it's a visual medium, it has to like, I don't know, it has to be something that you can monetize. It has to reach X amount of people for it to be labeled as, quote, good art. When art is just really the act of creation. And I think a lot of that mindset is a reflection of just how we are as people. Like, like you need to be wearing this type of clothing to be seen as professional
mm.
when it's really your mind that you're bringing to work, and the ethic that you bring to work. Um like when I walk around, I see a lot of people who look like they're in Spanx, like you're saying,
Mhm.
like just people who have learned like it's not okay to like laugh this way, it's not okay to speak this way, it's not okay to like express my emotions, like say if you're a man, I'm not allowed to express like feminine emotions, but I can express anger and I can
Yeah.
express like emotions that are aligned with like power, quote power,
Mm.
um and that limits people, to a whole side of humanity that otherwise they would be allowed to freely feel, freely interact with.
Yeah. I agree. I also think there's a couple quotes. Man, I love Bernadette Peters, and she's actually been performing in Los Angeles. I saw her last weekend. I'm seeing her this weekend too. But she has on her let me look it up real quick. She has on her uh, website a quote that is "Be yourself. Everyone else is taken." Oscar Wilde.
Yes.
And she's like crazy and over the top and like all these different things. I think that's the reason why I like her so much is because she just makes choices that are always like risky. Even now, she's like 77 years old or something.
Wow.
I apologize if it's the wrong age. She's like in her,
It's okay.
like this upper half of the 70s, well into it. And her range and her vocal control are not what they used to be. That's like clear. But she will still take like the ballsiest risks where I'm like, okay, you're just like,
Hell yeah.
you just don't even care. Yeah. And I feel like that is why she's so popular, because she has there are plenty of people with better voices than her,
Hmm.
is like a good way to kind of put it. There's probably plenty of people that are even better actresses than she is, but she became like the muse of like one of the most kind of like lauded musical theater composers of like the 20th century, Stephen Sondheim. And it's like, why? Probably because she was just so genuine. So I really feel like there is this untapped power in just being ourselves. And I don't know why, but I feel like in a lot of ways we have moved away from that. I don't know if it's like social media, but I even see it with people that, like when I was growing up, like liberal people were like actually liberally minded, and allowed for like a diversity of thoughts, didn't really thought police people,
Hmm.
etc. And now I feel like it's like the way that your compassion manifests itself has to look kind of like this. I feel like it has become like this
Hmm.
weird, almost like things are almost like and this happens in art, and it sounds like you're a little bit interested in art, but like sometimes we embrace naturalism and like the flaws of nature and just like the beauty of nature, and sometimes I feel like we don't. And
Yeah.
you can see it in fashion too. Like I remember like when I was in college, that would have been like in the early 2000s when we were wearing like plastic all the time. Like
Mm.
really artificial
Hmm.
looking was like the fashion for what was, and that kind of that taste comes and goes. You can see it in all sorts of different ways where we have embraced it sometimes and then gotten away from it.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the thing that's a little bit sad though is when it applies to who you are as a person, because if you can kind of like wear the plastic clothes and feel like, oh, this is fun, and and I'm expressing myself in different ways than I usually do, that I feel like sure, I love that for them. If though
Hmm.
it's something where it's like I feel like I'll give you kind of an example. This is like um so somebody I know, and who's older, uh, has had breast implants like back in like the 80s or whatever 90s, when this was popular. Like it seemed like everybody was getting it because it was like, well, now that you can, you might as well. It's almost kind of like now that you can have sex because of the pill, you might as well. And it's almost like a thoughtlessness about it. Like now that you can do this, then we should all just be doing this or whatever. And now the breast implants are leaking, and so now this person has to get them removed. And
Oh,
you're
wow.
like, this decision is probably so much a product of just that time period, like
Yeah.
the proliferation of breast enhancements at that time period. Just seems like she's not the only one. I know a ton of people who are in this situation to where I think this had to have been just like a product of the times, and that's what I worry about for people is how much are you going to become a product of the times in weird ways, like
Yeah.
ways that you kind of just like got caught up in, like they're not really you. It's not really a form of self-expression. Like sometimes when I would wear the plastic clothing, it's like not a form of self-expression at all. It's like a form of, and I guess when it's not a form of self-expression at all, I think that it's probably a form of self-mutilation.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's an interesting way to think about it.
Yeah, mutilating
I
the self, not like obviously cutting or something.
No, I got you. I got you. No, I kind of agree with like that concept of self-mutilation when you're not standing as yourself, like in
But you're
what
still
makes you
acting in these
individual.
ways,
Yeah.
that are like inconsistent with yourself. What is it otherwise? What else do we call it?
Yeah, it's like it's just like being a shell. And like I feel like when I've dated a few people who are on the narcissism spectrum,
Hmm.
and like trying to understand them has been such an interesting like such an interesting thing,
Did you
because my brain
know?
works so
Can I
differently.
back up just a little bit? Did you
Yes,
know
go
you're
for it.
like, oh, this person's kind of narcissistic, but I'm fine with it or whatever?
Not at the time, no. Like
Okay, all
at the
right.
time it was more like, I mean, I believe we're all products of our histories in
Sure.
a lot of ways. Like everything we care about, everything that we, like are attracted to, even all that is like either born into us or socialized into us. And
Hmm.
some people may take issue with that statement, but generally that's what I believe.
Yeah.
So like when I would get with these people, it was because I had my own traumas that these
Mm.
people would initially meet. And when I was with them at the time, I didn't understand that about myself. So when we split, I ended up just being like, all right, where's my responsibility in this? Like, what did I find attractive about this and why? And there was this terrible, terrible moment where like I was dating this girl and there was a moment we were just sitting together and I was like, oh my God, I'm dating my mother. That's fucking terrifying.
Yeah.
Um, and I did a lot of therapy, therapy really helped. But also just like trying to understand narcissism really helped me understand why like I was attracted to people who, fell on that spectrum.
Mm.
And that helped me change a lot about what I looked for in people,
Yeah.
in terms of like who I brought into my close circles.
Yeah.
Um,
That's interesting. So I had like a similar kind of thing where like I grew up with kind of bad boundaries. I felt like I had bad boundaries. And I think because of that, like my sense of intimacy was being around people who had bad boundaries, because
yeah.
then it was like, and I have a friend who's like this, and she says the craziest stuff. She'll be like, yeah, but. Isn't there a backlash against boundaries? And I'll be like, I don't think so. She'll be like, yeah, because like boundaries keep you from like true intimacy. I'll be like, no,
Mm,
I haven't heard about
interesting.
this. Yeah. I haven't
No,
heard about
I
this
don't think that's
backlash,
true.
but you can tell those are her like true thoughts is that boundaries keep you from true intimacy, and that like true intimacy is when you don't have any boundaries around
Right.
somebody and you just kind of like essentially merge with the other person and like I'm like, oh, maybe, but probably not. But that's who I sought
Yeah.
after
Yeah.
then is people who had bad boundaries because number one, I think the people with good boundaries didn't put up with me, so that they were just like off the table as options. And number two, yeah, that's what I thought. This is exciting. Like I need kind of people to meet me at my own energy level, which
Yeah.
was let's violate each other's personal boundaries, right?
Yeah, kind of, it's like when you don't see the need for it, then when you see people who do have the need for it, you're just like, why?
Mm.
Like what does that serve you other than, as a limitation to like how you're living?
Yeah,
Um, yeah, like I feel like our definitions for things or our understandings of like what are seen as like quote basic concepts, like they can vary so much. Like a person's definition of love can vary person to person. It's a very subjective like concept. But we all
yeah,
like walk about thinking that we all have the same understanding of love, like this person's understanding of love is to be without boundaries.
yeah.
Um,
That's another funny thing. I see it all the time with money.
yeah.
Even again, the same friend was like talking about money because she has like a little relative who is interested in finance, and this little relative of hers like never spends any money, that they get Christmas money or whatever. And she's like, but what's the point of money if you don't spend it? And I'm like, this is just such a weird question. Like, there's like a million other points of money other than spending it. Like you can create things, it can grow, it can provide security, like so the spending
Right,
it is like almost like the least likely thing that to help your improve your happiness or overall well-being. So,
right.
but I was like, man, it's so interesting how people view money in different ways. And you can tell they view it the different ways too, because they'll spend money in ways that aren't consistent with their preferences.
Yeah. Oh, I was reading this author. Well, I was actually listening to talks from her when she said this, I think, and she said like a very like clear window into somebody's life is to look at their money and to see where
Mm.
it's going because that's where their values are, because money is like a physical embodiment of our time. So that which
Yeah,
we spend our time on, is very telling to who we are, or rather where our priorities lie.
I sort of disagree with that though, because money's like one
Really?
of these, yeah, I do.
Got you.
And I think this is too true of time too. It's interesting that you brought that
Hmm.
up because I think that they will often act contrary to their values because they misunderstand money so much that they don't act in kind of consensual ways. It would be kind of like I do not mean this to be kind of like sensitive, but like imagine somebody who has had really bad, let's say, sexual experiences,
Hmm.
like rape, a lot of kind of weird, traumas, or not weird, but a lot of discordant kind of feelings that result from it. And let's say that person has like a certain sort of sexual behavior. Like, do we think that that is a true expression of her sexual choice, or do we think somehow her thoughts about sex have been distorted, or he or whoever,
Right.
have gotten distorted such that they're not really acting in their own preference. They're acting from a place of, uh, from almost like a lack of, not like a lack of, they just have learned the concept sex in inaccurate ways, like
Right.
ways that don't really truly reflect all that sex is. And that's how I feel about people with money, is that they have had traumatic experiences with money or other kind of unusual experiences, or unfortunately typical experiences with money that have somehow allowed them to learn things about money that are not necessarily seeing money for what it is. I feel the
Right.
same way about people with food, who have like issues with food, eating disorders, or equate food with love, or these types of things where, are is that truly their preference, the way that they're eating now, or is it just a manifestation of a disorder? And I say this actually coming,
Yeah.
from somebody who's, especially some of my past behavior, I think that wasn't me at all. That was really just my disorder. And I have an uncle who's bipolar, and he says some crazy stuff sometimes where I'm like, whoa.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I often think that's not him. That is his bipolar, So I guess that's what I mean about the money is I don't actually see I think
Right.
most people are disordered about money from my
I would agree
perception.
with that concept. Like most people are disordered about money. I think like in the same way, like your uncle or people with disorders, like we're all products of our socialization in biology,
Yeah.
and to that degree, we don't really have much choice in the way that like we live unless we learn what the root causes of those are and can change them,
I
like
totally agree with that. Keep go.
yeah. And I think with things like money as a parallel to like me searching out people who were not necessarily great for me.
Mm,
Like I was very limited to my knowledge of what my choices were at the time, and my
yeah.
knowledge of what the psychology of the people I was with and my own psychology looked like. And therefore I made the choices to the best of my ability that I could. And it's not necessarily that I wanted to be hurt. It was that I wanted love and I searched for it in a place that was not going to be able to provide that for me. And I think similarly with money, it can be like you can show the direction of like I guess how you've been taught to handle money. For instance, like if you grow up extremely poor, you could then grow up into an adult who's extremely financially like on top of it,
Hmm.
or you can grow into an adult who's like very, very poor at managing their funds because they've never witnessed somebody like managing their funds correctly. Like there's a variety of different ways to go.
Hmm.
But I think that like maybe a better word instead of like money showing where your values are is money showing where your like mental
Yeah.
status is, or your socioeconomic status is. I know that's not right. Like your it's just a very individual thumbprint. You say, all right, so you've
Yes.
learned to manage things this way. You've learned to spend your money in this way to like say like meet depression, say like if money and spending it brings you joy,
Hmm.
then you say, okay, I'm gonna buy things when I'm sad. you know?
Yeah.
Um and like
Yeah.
yeah, go on.
It's totally true what you say. In fact, but I want to get back to this. Can you help remind me? I'm going to forget. Maybe I'll put it in the chat
Yeah.
too. I really want to talk to this idea, but that you said that unless you get to the root cause, then it's basically like you are living in like a determinist kind of existence. Let's get to the root
Yeah,
cause you're in. Okay, but let me tell you this crazy story about my dad. I always feel like I can
Oh, go
tell
for
stories about my dad without
it.
infringing his privacy or whatever. I think partly it's because, and my own therapist said this to me, that I probably manifest certain behaviors that other people are like, okay, that's a clear indication she's disordered.
Mm, mm,
And that offended me at the time that people would be able to like look at like the things I do and say and know that about me. That kind of offended me. That
yeah,
triggered me. Not like a big trigger, but enough that I remember it. But now I see it kind of like in other people, and it's like you say with it being like a thumbprint. Like you can see the disorder. You can see how stuff has kind of gotten stymied in like different ways, or it's been allowed to flourish when it shouldn't have certain things. There's just not balance. There's not it's not natural. That's
right,
not. And I think a lot of people with like identity issues and stuff, they might be like, "Oh, but what is identity? It's largely this or whatever." But I guess that's what I mean. It's like the most natural. It's like there's no Spanx, it's not
there's no
even
Spanx. I love this analogy.
yeah, there's
Yeah,
no kind of restriction or like disruption to kind of what would naturally be. And it's kind of like time or whatever. Like if it's not distorted or whatever, you're perceiving it in the moment or anyways. So the story about my dad, he and his dad was the same way. Like did not want money. Like money like burned a hole in their pocket in like the weirdest ways. And I think it's kind of like this thought that having money makes you dirty. Like they're like
mm,
money was
hmm,
dirty in like ways that people used to think, I guess, that sex was dirty or that women are dirty or
yeah,
like kind of
yeah,
like a weird purity thing. Uh, but so like my dad grew up kind of with this, I think, reflected heavily. And I think that he has it in like such weird, distorted ways. Like if he gets money, he wants to just like flush it down the toilet. And that's how he has always lived his life. And I think a
hmm,
really good example of this is what has happened recently. He has a ton of siblings. Some of them were adopted, including his youngest brother, who is like younger than me by several years, but has had like is developmentally disabled, right? And then had got on for I don't know why it took so long, but finally got on what do we say? Disability, Social Security payments,
hmm,
and then got back paid, for all like the whatever time that he qualified for that he wasn't receiving it. So he ended up with like a $12,000 check, basically. And my
dang,
dad was like so freaked out that his brother had $12,000, and the brother wanted to just like buy an e-bike, because he can't drive. He takes the bus. He just wants an e-bike. But my
hmm.
dad was like, no, no e-bike.
Why?
In this completely like dominant weird way. And he's older than his brother by
I see.
like yeah, by like 40 years or something, right? 35 years or
Hmm.
something. So there's like he's the
Wow.
oldest and this is the youngest, right? Of like the span of however many kids. So he was like, no, definitely not an e-bike. And then it is true that my uncle had some dental issues, right? Does not take kind of good care of himself. He kind of lives on the fringes of society, is a good way to put it.
Hmm.
So, like somebody you'd see and be like, does that person have a place to sleep at night? Maybe not, like that's kind of his look. And I think that's kind of the way he's lived his life. So he goes to the dentist. My dad's taking him to the dentist, and he needs to get like several teeth pulled because they're giving him problems. And then there are other teeth that are like, this needs a root canal or whatever, or it's going to need to get pulled in like several years. And there were enough kind of bad teeth that they were like, they said if he wants, all these, the cheapest thing he could do, and he wants like perfect teeth, is to get dentures. And it's like my dad took that idea and just ran with it. And I was like, there's no way that this
Yeah.
person who's developmentally disabled and like lives on the fringes of society is going to take care of dentures. That was my
Yeah.
opinion. They're not going to, this is not something that's in their competency. And they're not, they're kind of I say fringes of society because they're competent about enough things that they're not really monitored the way that somebody who's lower functioning would be. Like in
Right.
a home or something, like they have quite a bit of autonomy. And unfortunately, that's why like the dental health has like suffered, is because they then don't do particular things. So I was like, definitely don't do the dentures. Just pull the teeth that need to be pulled and keep the other ones in until they need to get pulled. And then, just like he will still have teeth. It's like, how many teeth do you need to like eat a cheeseburger or whatever? Just like 12? Like he'll always have like enough teeth to be able to eat,
That's so
right?
fair.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I was like, I think my dad was like, he can't walk around with like missing teeth. And I'm like, he looks he looks fine for what he is. Like the missing teeth are not going to be the thing that people notice. But
Yeah.
I don't know what. So that he totally forced this. And I was like, this is mutilating your brother. Like this is a wrong thing that you're doing. It's like a terribly wrong thing that you're doing. And but
Hmm.
he got all the teeth pulled. He spent all the $12,000 on the dentures. In fact, they had to shop around and find like kind of a sketchy dentist who would do it for that cheap and would do it
Oh
at
no.
all. Isn't that messed up?
That's a little messed up. Yeah, like
Like this is a crazy story still to me. And all because though he wanted to spend the $12,000. He didn't want his brother to have that money.
right.
Because like my dad sees other people largely as like an extension of himself, and he just got like over fixated on his brother. And he even will kind of admit it afterwards. After like the high is over, he'll be like, that went too far. Like
Oh
he has said
no.
that. Yeah, he said that
No.
about his
Yeah.
brother. He's like, yeah, I got obsessed with him a little bit. He has like some self-awareness sometimes about it. So it's like
Yeah.
that's where he is now about it. He knows it was a mistake. He knows it was kind of a crazy thing. And guess
Gosh.
what? Does my uncle wear the dentures?
No. No.
No, doesn't. No. So his
No.
diet is totally changed, right? He's only eating like refried beans or like these soft foods that are not really nutritious. So it's
Dang.
it's been and his jaw has collapsed, right? He wouldn't even wear the dentures when he was supposed to, like while he was healing. You're supposed to wear the dentures, I guess, to kind of get the dentures and the gums to form with each other. Mostly the gums, I'm
Uh,
sure. It's not the dentures that are forming. But that he wouldn't do it. So then the dentures are kind of useless. They don't even fit now because he didn't do what he was supposed to do after the healing.
yeah.
And so it's just like these $12,000 dentures and he has no teeth. And it's just like this was a wrong thing to have done. But like this is what happens when you feel like you can't have any money. There can't just be money sitting in a bank account. Like you cannot psychologically have that happen. Isn't that
Right.
weird?
And
I find that to be such a weird thing because for me, like I can have money in a bank account and I don't even think about it. Zero do I think about it.
yeah, like I think it's interesting looking at like how men are taught to use money. Like
Hmm,
men are taught to be the ones who are in control of money and how it's spent. And it's
interesting.
sort of like a marker of power and authority too,
Mm.
like to be the one in control of the funds, to be the one who gets to decide how they're spent and to make those decisions. And I think a lot of people on the spectrum of narcissism have a lot of control needs, you know,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to people who like maybe they see are maybe like doing a little bit better than them via receiving a large amount of money. Like, okay, to be in control of that large sum of money, I get to
Hmm.
decide how it's spent, type of thing, you
That's
know?
really interesting. That's very insightful. I hadn't even thought about that. But I think that is true because if you leave the money there, for instance, there's a chance that somebody else will spend it, then you won't have been the one to have decided how it was spent.
Yes,
It's like a lost opportunity
yes.
or something. That's maybe why because I was like, what is the sense of urgency about spending
Hmm.
this $12,000?
Yeah, yeah, it's very interesting like to see just the ways people kind of succumb to their own psyches,
Mm,
like you're talking about with your dad, like just needing to decide where that goes, and becoming like borderline obsessed with like how things go with your brother,
hmm.
especially being
Yeah.
like an older sibling and
Yeah.
being in a position where he's like expected kind of to.
Here's the weirdest thing though, Z. For like
Yeah,
20 years, they barely talked to each other. Like zero
right.
did they talk to each other. And then it was just like some almost like a switch flicked on in his head. And then he was like having lunch with him like every other day, taking him to all these
Mm-hmm.
weird appointments. It was almost like how like because before I think he saw him as not him. And then once he saw him as him or whatever it was like now he like I think of it, I use this phrase, you're either on his radar or you're off his radar. And it's
Right.
much better to be off his radar. Otherwise, he's gonna do weird things. He's gonna like make up lies to your mom about conversations that you never had. You know, he's gonna do like the
Yeah.
weirdest stuff where you're like, wow.
Yeah, yeah, like being on the pedestal is a very dangerous place to be
Mm,
on with somebody who doesn't have a good sense of boundaries and doesn't have a good grip on like where they are at in their
yeah,
own head versus what the reality of the world is, or like how they move through the world. Um, yeah, not all attention is great attention.
no.
No. Let's see. Oh, I before we get too far into this, I did have questions that I wanted to ask you.
Hmm.
One was, how many trains of thought do you have at any given point in time?
Uh, I feel like it's not even like a thread of thought or like a train of thought. It's like, you know how they say that light is both a particle and a wave?
Yes.
It feels like that. It feels like maybe there is kind of a thread there, but also it manifests itself largely in the particle. And they know this, right? I love this experiment because like they make the smallest little hole possible and then they shoot light through. And it's so small of a hole that basically only one particle is going through at a time. And then they have like film or something that's like light sensitive that is catching the light as it comes and it just looks like a bunch of dots everywhere, you know, instead of like what they thought it was going to be like a wave, like a single wave hit and you know, and it's like collected or whatever. That's what it looks like in my brain, I guess. Like the film, there's just a bunch of dots there. It's coming maybe from the same light source or something, coming from the same sort of wave, but it's like there's not necessarily an obvious link to the different dots, how they got there.
Right. So you're saying you have like a scattering of thoughts that
Yes.
are not necessarily like connected in a way that somebody who might be neurotypical might say, all right, A to B to C. It'd be like A, X, W, S all together. Yeah.
It looks like shotgun like pellets or whatever
Yeah.
hit something is what it looks like. To me, that's how I experience it. I feel like I'm like the, you know, target or whatever that's just got hit with shotgun pellets. And
Mhm.
that's what the thoughts look like is that they're disconnected, even though they probably came from the same source. So another psychopath that I met called it like a crazy lateral way of thinking. And in fact, it's very difficult for me to think linearly. Like I have to
Mhm.
kind of sensory deprivation myself and like put on Bach, like Baroque music is the best for this for whatever
Mhm.
reason, and just get like so zoned in a particular thing in order to do like linear thinking, like writing or communicating. But it's really
Mhm.
interesting for like thought, and this is something that I've started doing recently. I'm going to actually suggest this to people the same way that I have suggested Feldenkrais as like a good way to like learn to re-engage with your body, your physical form, is like re-engaging with your mental capacity, I guess, your mental form is I started uh, just giving my brain like a ton of space. You know how they say like with kids with iPads, they become kind of fixated on the iPad so much that the iPad spills over into the rest of their like waking life. You know, it's like their brain's
Yeah.
constantly thinking about the next hit from the iPad, unfortunately.
Yeah. No, I get you. Yeah.
Yeah, I realized that my brain had been kind of doing that with like thinking like the purpose of the brain was to be engaged in productive activity, I think is what ended up happening. So I would not be able to just like sit and just be have no purpose at all. I had kind of lost that capacity. And I think the bad part about it, like with the iPad, is not necessarily that productive activity is bad, but if you have lost the ability to have activity be not kind of purpose driven, then that is going to end up spilling over into like the rest of your life. You know, like I think I my baseline anxiety was kind of increasing. Like I'd be like, I need to like finish eating so I can get to this. And after I do that, I need to do it quickly so I can get to this. Like it was like, where am I rushing to?
Hmm.
Why am I
Yeah.
doing everything so quickly to get to what? To get to like, is my whole life just going to be this like racing to the next thing to get to this, to get to that? Like I'm not really experiencing things. So I started, and I intuition kind of guided me to this, but I'll just tell you what like the end result was. Now when I drive, I don't listen even to the radio. I just like let my mind wander. Honestly, it
Mm-hmm.
has like a limited capacity for doing that still. I can only do that for like up to an hour. I also in the morning usually will just go, there's like a place where I can see the ocean. I just go to this place where I can see the ocean and I just sit there and do my tennis elbow exercises because
Yeah.
but I just mostly stare at the surfers. Sometimes there's dolphins, sometimes
Yeah.
there's like a sea lion. Once I saw a shark,
Oh, very
like
cool.
like through
Very
the
cool.
water. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Other things that you see, there's like an osprey, you know, a bunch of osprey, different types of birds or whatever that fly by. And I just kind of like really try to be, I guess people will call it mindfulness. You just try to be present. And
Yeah.
I'm like working on building that up because like I have different thoughts. You know, I guess what that situation gives like enough space for my thoughts to like find to stretch out their legs, I guess. You know,
Yeah.
like I feel like I've been forcing my brain to basically be sitting in like a coach airplane seat, and it's
Yeah,
not
that's a good way
natural.
to put it. Like I think
Yeah,
that's the difference between like creating and consuming somebody else's creation, and that
so
feels like
true.
production, but it's like you're still cramped in the parameters of what that person has made. And when you're
Yeah.
creating something, it's like, oh, that coat, like your legs getting stretched out.
I don't know if this is
Yeah.
kind of like what you had just said or something, and it's kind of controversial, but it's been like 15 years since I've read a book, like especially a paper, like a book that's in physical form. I have read
Hmm.
parts of articles. You know, I often read articles, probably short form stuff. And there has been like one book that audiobook that I read like 2 years ago. But other than that, that's like the first and only in the past 15 years. But part of it's just I think that, you know, there are times when you are I don't know. I feel like it clouds my mind. You know, it's almost like I have such a fragile sense of self.
Hmm.
Still, still have such a fragile sense of self that like allowing anyone to enter in like such a dominant way as a book, which requires
Right.
like what 6 to 8 hours of reading, is like too invasive still. It feels like it's like, you know, these invasive species or whatever that like show up in the Great Lakes, the bloodsucker
Hmm.
one or whatever. That's what it feels like. I'm just so susceptible to invasive species that even though I'm sure there are many great books that I need to be
Yeah.
reading, and people give me books all the time, and even on vacation, if other people like pick out a book and read or on the plane, and I just feel like they have like a phrase for this now, raw dogging life. I, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's so funny.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
just try to raw dog it, you know, because as long as I can, because it's like so good for my brain. It feels like when you take the iPad away from the 2-year-old, you know, that's what it feels like. Is like, thank God we can
Yeah.
like finally, you know, stretch our legs.
Yeah, it's like just being in the sanctity of your own mind.
Yeah,
Like it's a very important thing to return to because you're right, that's where your sense of self is. And I really understand what you're talking about, like with books, you get immersed into somebody else's perspective because like when I'm around people. I like immerse myself in their life. And I'm like, all right, these are all the things that make you you. This is what you feel when this happens. This is like what you like think when certain thing is said. Like to a point where I'm like, oh, I feel like I am living in this person's head and I need to
Mm.
like get out and become my own person again and
Yeah.
like just create a wall, which is, like is just a very important exercise to return to yourself and to allow yourself to be in the present and to let your mind wander, down the paths it has proclivities towards, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, so when you say like earlier you said you can drive and think for about an hour. What
Hmm.
happens after that hour?
Then it's like it gets jangly. I can tell that it's like with my girlfriend, we have a joke about she can tell when my mind has gotten jangly. And the joke is, do you need more song?
Interesting.
Which
Like you
came
just have too many things going on at once.
Well, it's like it gets so bad. Here's like so the more song came from like my nephew, who especially during the pandemic, we babysat him a ton. His parents both worked from home, so we would like take him to the park or whatever. And he had like limited verbal capacity because he was a toddler. But if he wanted to listen to a different song, he would say, "More song."
Oh,
So, I don't know what it is with music, but like when my mind gets like jangly, I will start to sing to myself. Like
mm,
start saying all these kind of like repetitive things. It's like it's gotten like the brain is overtaxed. It wants a break from like doing whatever the thing was before. It wants to go back in the
got you.
Sphinx. It wants
What
to.
happens like when it gets jangly? Like is it just like you have like far too many shotgun pellets going on at once? Is it like
Yeah, that's a good
just
question.
intrusive thoughts, or is it like
It feels like, yeah, do you have you ever driven a manual transmission?
no, no, never been brave enough.
Yeah, so the concept though, there's like let's say 5 gears or whatever, right? And
Yeah.
you're in first gear, and that's the smallest. Yes, that's the smallest gear or whatever. And then you press in the clutch, right? And when the clutch is going, the motor's still spinning, but there's no connection between the motor and the gear. That's what happens when you put in the clutch, and then you like shift the gears, and then when you let out the clutch, the gears connect again to the motor. I guess the drive shaft or no, it's not the drive shaft. Drive shaft powers the wheels or whatever. But yeah, whatever is the motor. I'll say carburetor, even though I think that's wrong.
Got you.
Yeah, and that's what it feels like. Is it feels like the clutch is pressed in and the motor's still going, but we're not moving anywhere because it's not connected to a gear. You know what it also feels
Got you.
like? There's there are some machines, let's say they're like grinding up grain or something, but they're
Yeah.
meant only to be used, and this is true, I guess, of like garbage disposal. They're meant only to be used with stuff in it. If there's not stuff
Hmm.
in it, then the gears will grind on themselves. If there's not grain inside to be grinding, then the metal will grind itself. And there's another analogy I thought. Oh, sometimes I go to the zoo a lot, and sometimes animals have this too with their teeth. I just learned that it was like beavers, I think, have their teeth just continually grow, and they have to be like chewing on it
Yeah.
constantly. Yeah, and this is true of like dogs' nails and stuff. They have to kind of like naturally, and if they don't get it enough, then like they'll keep growing, and you'll have to like clip them or whatever. That's what it kind of feels like. It feels like the machine's going, but there's no grain in it, so the gears are grinding on themselves.
Got you. So like what would the gears be in this example? Just like warring thoughts?
Yeah, it's not even warring. It's like the thoughts are like if a thought is like a toenail, it's like this becomes like an ingrown toenail. Like it's
Okay.
turning on itself. The thought is like it's like like
Got you.
yeah, when This happens to me all the time. And is it Google Meet or whatever, the Google version of
I
Teams
think
when
so.
they're like, yeah, don't project your whole screen because then it will project the screen and then you see Google Meet, so it will project and then it'll be like
Oh,
millions of
okay.
versions going in the back. That's what it feels like.
Gotcha.
It feels like I'm suddenly in a French surrealist film in which
Gotcha.
like the camera is looking at the monitor that's projecting the camera and is looking at the monitor that's projecting the camera
Yeah,
like it turns in on itself like it
I
becomes
got you.
it's watching itself watch itself.
That's that's really, really interesting. So like
Yeah.
when you have too many thoughts without enough like I guess enough distance from them, I guess to just have that thought, it sort of warps in a way.
I would say it's kind of like this, let's say like almost like over the hours or something, I'll have different things happen to me or different kind of stuff, whatever. And then
Yeah.
it's like almost like let's imagine like your kitchen sink, your garbage disposal or something. Like it has kind of a buildup of stuff of like carrot shavings and whatever. And then you run the garbage disposal for a while, you know, so it's like if it's been like 8 hours since the last time that I just
Hmm.
sat down and thought about things for an hour, then I process through all those things that happened in the past 8 hours. I'm like feeding the
Yeah,
machine, and then it processes the stuff. But once it's done processing the stuff, then that's when it starts eating
got
itself.
you. So it
Yeah. Then I
processes
have to
itself.
yeah, it
Okay.
processes itself. Yes. And
That's
in a way
interesting.
that's like your muscles eating itself, like in a
Yeah,
way that's not good. And so that's why we put the music on because then the music gives it something to think about it again. It's like running water down
right.
your garbage disposal is the music.
So what does processing itself like look like if you have an example of a thought that's processed itself? Just like a
Um,
casual thought.
it's not a thought. There's no thought there. The
No
brain,
thought.
yeah, that's the
Oh,
problem.
it's
If there
just
was
the
a
brain
thought,
working.
then it would be processing, yeah, it's just the brain working. It's almost
Interesting.
like, yeah, it's like running. This is like true too. If you like, if car wheels are spinning, right? And they're
Hmm.
spinning on ice or something where they're not getting traction, then they just spin, 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 and they can go like super fast, like way too fast for what they should be doing, and then like burn things out. That's what it's like.
What does that feel like when your brain is like running, but there's nothing like necessarily being processed?
It feels like I think the French absurdist film movement or whatever is like the best example. Like it feels dreamlike. It feels like you're
Hmm.
hydroplaning.
Yeah. Does it feel just like kind of like dissociation, kind of,
You don't
you
know what
know?
dissociation means.
Dissociation, it's like it's sort of like that feeling of unreality where your brain sort of just like disconnects. And like you can be there watching things happen around you, say. Some people say it feels like watching a movie.
Hmm.
Like watching things happen around you and you're kind of like on autopilot maybe. Or I
No.
don't
If anything,
know,
it feels like I'm too in it. Like not
too
like
in it.
I'm like watching myself doing it, but the opposite, where I'm like way too like if I was like suddenly to
Hmm.
like get up to this camera and like too close.
Yeah, got you. So it's like kind of the other way. So like what I'm thinking about is like when you're put into a state of fight or flight and everything becomes enhanced,
Yeah.
sort of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
everything becomes enhanced because it's like I am too kind of aware. I'm hyper aware. I'm hyper,
Mm,
but aware in like the weirdest ways. Not even of some like normally your brain is filtering all this like stuff. So when you see things, you're like you see the coyote. That's the thing that you see. You don't
right.
see like the whatever. You see the threat. You think the only I'm mostly now just thinking the conversation with you, not like what I'm eating for lunch next or whatever,
Hmm.
and it's like there's no filter, and so it's like all the thoughts, like everything that you're seeing, everything that you're hearing, is kind of coming in like this weird way that really seems like silly. That's the like easiest way. So it's
Right.
like silly. It's almost like baby talk level of silliness, where it's like the brain is struggling so hard. So that's when I start singing to myself to give it
Got
something
you.
to hear. Yeah.
So it's like when you don't have thoughts to preoccupy your brain is just very busy processing your immediate surroundings to like an intense degree.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool. I mean, it's not probably
But
not.
not in any way that even feels like it's my immediate surroundings because it's like so unfiltered that it no longer becomes recognizable as it, like it's
Right.
almost like when people have a stroke and they start just saying syllables and they don't even realize that they're just syllables. That's the sort of sense it makes.
That sounds really confusing. I see
Yeah.
why you call it like jangles.
Yeah, jangly.
Yeah, jangly. That
Uh-huh.
makes sense. Huh.
Yeah.
All right. I wanted to ask you a little bit if you're ready to like move on from
Yeah.
this line
Sure.
of questions. I wanted to ask you about like your creation process because you're a musician. And I feel like a lot of people say, oh, like you need to like feel your music to like really create something, and that's not true at all, you know, like music theory exists, for example, and the psychology of music can be understood, you know, like certain
Mm.
like an A minor is what like a darker feeling, right? I'm not a
Yeah.
big musician, so I don't know
Yeah.
versus like a major is like a brighter feeling, right? And people
Yes.
like that's a measurable like response in people. And so you can create something like very beautiful and very touching without necessarily having to like feel your way through it, you know, or something
Yeah.
like that. Like that's just kind of where my brain goes towards when it comes to like creation. So what kind of process do you go through when you make music?
So I would say that, yeah, that I agree with everything you said, and that it's probably similar, like a good analogy. And it's kind of funny that my brain loves to reason in analogies. That's the way that, and that's probably like part of the weird lateral thing. But I think analogies are the way that the default way I understand the world and new things is to look at the relationships and connections and the way that it interacts and be like, oh, this is kind of like that. I actually think it's kind of like the periodic table,
Mhm.
like noble gases and stuff.
Oh, it's been a long time since I took chemistry.
Yeah, don't
What's
don't
with the noble
worry.
gases?
Noble gases are like helium. I feel like there's a periodic table up
Right.
here somewhere,
They're
but
like
like
the earliest ones.
they're the ones that have the electrons. Like if there's like two spaces for electrons, they have two. If there's eight spaces in the next one, they have an additional eight, et cetera.
Oh, right.
So
Okay.
they have the equal number of electrons per the is it electrons or is it protons?
No, I think
Protons.
you're right. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, but protons and electrons usually are the same, so same thing or whatever. So these are like helium's different than whatever the next up is different, but they act the same in a lot of ways because they have these things. So in my mind, everything's like a huge periodic table, which
Hmm.
is like columns of things that are different, but also they act the same. They have like different, you know, characteristics or something, but they're mostly mechanically the same. So, yeah, the analogy I would say to music is that, I know that a lot of musicians feel music or whatever, and that's probably like having um, the empathy, what do we call it? That's like the
Yeah.
emotional
Emotive
empathy.
energy and empathy versus cognitive empathy.
Yeah, versus
Yeah.
cognitive empathy. Yeah,
I was thinking about that a lot when I was thinking about this question.
yeah. That's
Hmm.
basically what it is. It's like you can just reason to it, like, and there are certain things that I learned that people probably learn and like forget. Like I know, for instance, that like in a chord, like a C major chord or something, the
Hmm.
third of the chord, the E, is our ear naturally wants to hear it flat by
Mm.
like quite a bit, like 5% flat or something. And then the fifth is like, if anything, like a little bit sharp. That's how, because of the overtone series, the harmonic series, that's how like the different harmonics, like when you play a note, you actually hear multiple notes. And in order to get it like synced up the most, that's like how you would do it, is to
Ah.
play that third flat. And I will tell you, in law school, do you know the Queen of the Night aria in the Marriage of
Yes.
I'm not the Marriage of Figaro in the Magic Flute? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was listening to it, and when she sings it twice, and the chords are slightly different. Like it's identical. I've
Hmm.
looked at the score. The melody is the same, but the chords are slightly different. And in this version of the recording I was listening to, I was like, she is singing the melody slightly different because the notes in the melody have a different role in the different chords. What used to be the
Oh,
fifth is
interesting.
now the third. And so she is literally singing that note, the same note that she just sang. She's singing it flat because now it's part of a different chord. And I was like, this is nuts. I
Hmm.
was like, this has
Hmm.
blown my mind. And that's the way I think about music.
That's really cool. Okay, that makes sense. Like what you told me about like your thoughts and the way that they work. It's like the shotgun pattern. So like I have ADHD, so when I
Mm,
hear something, it's like that whole scattering of thought.
mm,
Like someone will give me a whole list of instructions, and it's so hard for me to like process that whole list because the first like item on that list will spring to mind like five different things. And I'll have to process those five different things. And then the next thing on the list will come by and, maybe we'll be on the fourth item of the list by the time I finish processing all five of those things. And I'm like, holy shit, where are we? Um, but that sort of like scattering of thought, I think makes for an a difference in pattern recognition
yeah.
because you see all of the elements out there before you. And you're like, oh, like all of these elements, when I see them before me, I can see their interconnectedness. Like you're talking about like the third and the fifth. Um, you see those like arrayed before you on the periodic table. You're like, okay, this is
Yes.
how these two can connect. Maybe that's something that somebody with more of a linear train of thought might struggle to comprehend more, or not
Yeah.
struggle to comprehend, but to piece together in that similar way.
Yeah, because there are a million ways that you could organize the periodic table. But the reason why we have such a standard one is because it has like these columns that puts kind of related things together or whatever. But I
Hmm.
think if you wanted to focus on something else, like if you wanted to make it alphabetical, like you totally could, and that
Yeah,
that makes sense in a way, or if you wanted to just like have a string of numbers and it just kind of like, it's in a circle or something. You like the different ways that you kind of conceptualize the thing are going to allow you to see different connections. And like if it was a circle, I mean, I'm sure I would think totally differently about a periodic table that was like arranged as a circle. I'd be like, this is
yeah,
nuts, and you would just there would be like certain things you would just be more enlightened about. That would just
yeah,
be like the nature of it.
yeah, like yeah, different patterns that would stick out to you, different ways of relation that would stick out because of that different arrangement. That's a cool thing to think about.
Yeah.
I like that thought.
Hmm.
That kind of leads me into like oh, I in your book, like really early on, you said something similar. I'm not going to be able to quote this directly because I can't remember. But you said something like you believe one of the higher forms of intelligence is to be open to different ways of thinking.
Yeah, that
Is
is
that
so
true?
hard. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. When did that sort of become the conclusion that you came to and decided to act on, and
Hmm.
how?
That's really interesting because that leads me to the thing I left in the chat too. But I think openness is so hard, and I relearned this lesson. It's funny that you say that's in the book because I felt like I just became obsessed with this idea like 2 or 3 years ago. And I'll tell you why. I think I've mentioned it before on like some videos. I was in New York, cat sitting, and I was watching like a lot of, it was during Christmas. So I was watching a lot of different versions of the Messiah at the time. I was like, oh, this will be fun. Like I'll watch this, and there's a Messiah sing along. So I was hearing it more often than I otherwise would. And one of the arias is thou shalt break them in pieces, that thou shalt dash
Hmm.
them with a rod of iron. And I was like, this is so weird that this is Jesus, like talking
Yeah.
about Jesus breaking people and
Yeah.
dashing them with a rod of iron. So I was like, how does this make sense? For like weeks I was thinking about this, like, how does this make sense with who we know Jesus to be, or who we think Jesus is, or what people kind of generally think of Jesus. And I started thinking about like this idea that sometimes people need to be broken, and that's like the best thing for them. They're in a bad
Interesting.
way of thinking. Yeah, and in order to progress beyond, they actually need to break this particular way of thinking, and they need to be broken. So it's funny because now even I still do this to this day, like ask, sometimes in my little prayers or whatever, like, should I bless this person or break them? Or ask,
Interesting.
yeah, should I ask for their
Hmm.
blessings or should I ask for their breaking? And I think about it all the time. Like, does my mom need blessings or breaking? Does my dad need blessings or breaking? Go
That's
through
such
kind
an
of like,
interesting way of thinking about it. Like I get that,
yeah,
like we can be very limited to our thoughts, and having them cracked open in that way that you're talking about, like it gives so much freedom.
I ask even for my own self, do I need blessing and breaking? And it's
Yeah.
really hard because it's like this kind of age-old philosophy problem of like, you don't know what you don't know. And
Right.
so I always try to expose myself to different things because I know that in differences, kind of like with traveling, you can see things differently, different types of people, and that can like break you free a little bit of like the way that you got used to seeing the world, your version of the world in your neighborhood or
Right.
whatever. But I do it now with social media. So I've been talking about this a little bit, but I've, for the past like 10 months, been following so many Black excellence sites.
Hmm.
And I just realized there's like an entirely parallel world of like Black culture, Black everything that I just had like was not on my radar at all. And
Yeah.
it's really helped to kind of just like take a step back and like see like a bigger perspective of reality. It's like traveling, right? It's like you're immersed a little bit more in like a different culture, and so you're able to see your own culture with different eyes,
Yeah.
slightly different eyes in a different kind of perspective. So the idea of openness, I think it's funny that it's in the book too. But that I don't know how I became fixated or obsessed with this. I think I've
Hmm.
always been a truth seeker. That's like a core um, identity feature for me. And I think that to the extent that openness is so necessary for seeing reality as it is, without bias, without even necessarily context, sometimes. Is just something like I like I embrace. That's my main, probably, if I had a goal or something, a drive, an internal drive is a better way to put it, maybe it would be to try to just experience reality as accurately as possible,
Yeah.
which is like such
I
a,
feel that.
yeah, weird thing actually.
No,
That's so
that's
important to
what
me.
drew me to like your channel and like to your work, honestly, because I feel that from you. And like I
Mm,
can cognitively like see that in the way that you talk and the way that you process. Like it's always in pursuit of seeing the root
yeah,
of it.
yeah, the
And
root
I
of it.
think,
So
yeah.
that
Sorry,
gets
go.
to the little thing I put in the chat. Unless you get to the root of it, you're basically like in determinism. Now, that's not exactly
Yeah.
what you said. People can rewind and hear exactly what you said. But on my way up to dog sit where I'm currently at, it's like a 2-hour drive or whatever, and I spent the first like hour and 10 minutes in like quiet contemplation.
Hmm.
And then my brain was like, yo, getting a little sideways. I can feel that we're hydroplaning a little bit. So then I put on
Yeah.
a podcast. It's a Mormon podcast. If people want to listen to it, it's from, I think, Faith Matters, and it's Terrell Givens, and he's talking about free will. That's probably enough information that people could look it up.
That's
So he,
so interesting. Sorry,
yeah,
like I've been deep diving into both Mormonism, like just learning more about Mormonism and also free will, like
yes.
those two concepts. Hmm.
And Mormons have kind of a unique, let's say, fixation on, they'll say agency is the word that they use, but basically like your ability to choose. is essentially what they're saying. So they were talking about free will. They talk about Sam Harris, who
Hmm.
has all this kind of information about how free will is limited, and even so limited maybe that we end up in like essentially what's called determinism, which, and we kind of
Hmm.
reference this, several times, you have especially, where you come from a socialization, a genetic predisposition, of physical limitations, so many of these things that kind of like go into you, that how free is your will actually? And you mentioned this earlier too,
Yeah.
like if you don't even realize that another kind of life is available to you, are you really choosing the life that you have? Or
Right.
like the
Right.
lack of kind of knowledge about different choices. But then kind of thinking about this, in listening to the podcast, I had this thought, and they kind of mentioned it a little bit, that, and you mentioned it too, unless you get to the root of kind of what was the thing, then you're basically in determinism. And I think that's kind of a little bit where my thoughts are right now, at least, is that you maybe can't control this moment, and you maybe can't control the thing that happened to you, or maybe even not the thing that you chose. But I do think there's something more to this idea of like, so maybe your choices are limited in the present, and maybe they're even limited in the future. But I think the way that we engage with our past is actually maybe where we see the most agency. And like in the podcast, they said, and isn't this like the true meaning of repentance, which is just like a natural reflection that we have on the past and sort of reconciling uh, our expectations of what the world should have been with what actually happened, or
Yes.
our
Yeah.
expectations of who we are versus how we actually acted, and
Right.
and trying to get to the root of it, as you kind of mentioned with like dating the multiple narcissists, I think you said more than one, and then trying to figure out what is the reason why, and thinking, like the person that you were with the one time, and thinking that she was like your mom. I think this is like where we get the agency though, because if we can go back and reflect on stuff in the past, like the past, I feel like is where we sometimes experience the most freedom, almost like paradoxically, because the past
Hmm.
can't be changed, but the way that we view the past easily can. It's like one of
Oh,
the
yes.
easiest
Okay.
things that we can change about ourselves is the way that we understand the past, and our past selves. And I
Right.
think that's I think this idea, unless you get to the root cause of whatever. So if you can look at the past and be like, I mean, this is how I discovered I was a sociopath. I was like, why?
Why? Yeah,
Why
that's the
every three
question.
years? Yeah. Do I have like this self-destruction? Why did I do and say these things? There's a pattern here. And if I like follow the breadcrumbs of the pattern, I can get to the root cause. And if I get to the root cause, it's almost like if you get to the root cause, it's like, is it possible to do that without having an epiphany, like a catharsis? It's like you don't even have to change your mind. It's like you see the world almost instantly differently. And
Hmm.
in that
Oh, yes.
that way, you are changed because the thing, like the way that you conceived the world before, is just so. I feel like people feel this way too, who have had near-death experiences or whatever. You can't go back to the way that you saw the world before, because once you
Right.
see it, you can't unsee it. And then now that you're seeing the world differently, you'll never behave the same again. And it's not even trying. You don't have to use willpower. There's no willpower involved. The only willpower that's involved is choosing to look backwards and
Right.
trying to do this reconciliation, with yourself. Like it's the most powerful thing, I think, maybe even like in like humanity is this power of like reflecting on past behavior. I don't even think it's limited to humanity. I mean, this is how like everybody, animals, whatever, plants, trees, experience reality, I think, is like you're like, oh, can I eat this? Whoops, no, I threw up, coyote again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then I'm not gonna eat that anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like this is where I think free will manifests itself the most. At least this is the thing
Yeah.
I've been thinking about with the stuff that you've been saying and the podcast that I listened to on my drive up here.
Yeah. I think like allowing yourself a wider range of autonomy in terms of your choices in the future is definitely like at least in part like affected by how much you're willing to look at your choices in the past and to
Mm,
say, all right, like this was my perspective. It doesn't have to be.
yeah,
This was, like say changing your mindset from like being a victim into somebody who, has power, even in situations where you were victimized and saying, all right, this is where I
mm,
had power. This is where I can exercise it in the future, you know?
yeah,
Like that sort of like broadening of the choices before you offers you so much ability to grow and to, not be trapped in by your socialization or to feel the effects of your biology, but not necessarily to allow them to affect you negatively in your life or in a way that you don't necessarily want them to affect you as greatly, like they'll still be there.
yeah.
But yeah.
I think that when I was little, this is the analogy I think of for this.
Hmm.
I used to read choose your own adventure books like quite a
Oh, okay.
bit.
Hmm.
Yeah, and there's also that Netflix uh, Black Mirror episode
Yeah.
Bandersnatch. Yeah, which
Oh, I
does the
haven't
same.
seen Bandersnatch.
Yeah, it's same thing though. But I think that these choose your own adventure books or Bandersnatch, like if let's say you have two choices at the beginning, right? You
Hmm.
choose one versus the other. You do have limited choices after that. Like you've chosen one, and then now this whole half of the world is no longer available
Yeah.
to you anymore because you're on this trajectory. But I think, like, what I used to do is if I'm like, and now you're dead, that's what my thing was. I was like, whoops, let's go back. Let's back up a little bit. Right? And I would read
Yeah.
through them, and I love to read through them multiple times because I'm like, what would happen if, and I did the same thing with Bandersnatch. What would happen if I chose the exact opposite, basically, of everything? Let's see
Hmm.
all the different ways that it would play out. And I think that you can you obviously can't change the past, but nor was I changing the past when I was reading the Choose Your Own Adventure. But I was revisiting the past in a way that
Hmm.
led to me reading a different new thread into my future, right? And I think that's
Right.
the analogy I think of is that obviously you can't change the past, you already read that. Like, we can't go back in time or whatever. But you can like revisit the past in ways that now you're on a different thread for some reason. It's as if you did choose the other different thing. And now that whole half that was kind of closed to you before is open to you. Like, I do think that is like
Yeah.
what actually happens. Like, that's the best maybe way to describe it is like, uh, kind of what you said, like you just have different opportunities in the future if you go back to the past.
Yeah, like it's like having the imagination to sort of like run that simulation and say, all right, what could have been different is such an important like ability because it provides you so many like ideals that you can step into in your future. You know,
Mm,
like if you look at your situation, you say, all right, this is the truth of it, and this is how I got here because, this is the truth of what got me here. Then, what lies before me can be a repetition, or it can
mm,
be this ideal that I've simulated, or it could be something much worse that I have also simulated, but
yeah,
the choice is mine,
yeah.
to
But
a
the
degree.
choice mostly, I think, yeah, your biggest choice, like your most robust choice, is the choosing to look backwards to the past. I agree.
Yeah, and to say, all right, I have power in my future to make sure that's, not something that repeats if it's not something I want to repeat. Like I feel like a lot of people do reminisce and they say, all right, these are all the painful things I've gone through, and these are, the things that led to it. What do I do with it now? And they're
Hmm.
like, well, I don't have the imagination to say, all right, well, like this is where I need to step so that this doesn't happen. I think a lot of that has to do also with personal responsibility and
Hmm.
saying, like these are the things I wasn't responsible for. This is what I am responsible for. And within this responsibility is my ability to affect change in my own present.
I love
Lots of
it.
thoughts.
Yeah, I know. And I remember that you have to leave. Do
I
you have any
do, I
like
do.
closing thoughts?
Uh, I don't know. It was just really cool getting to talk with you and getting to ask you so many questions. I appreciate you sitting down with me, spending the time. You know, you've
Yeah.
broadened my worldview quite a bit, like through your work and through your book, and also just through your willingness to be open.
Yeah, thank
Really
you. And
appreciate
thank
you.
you so much for your insights. You said a couple things where I was like, wow, now I never saw it that way and I totally see it now. And that's the blessing of like talking to different people is now I will never go back to the way I was before.
I know, big same, big same. It's
Yeah.
crazy how much two people can have an impact on each other from, never really having met. Yeah.
Maybe
Thank you so
and your
much.
questions were really great too. If you ever ha want to come back, feel free, just contact me.
Oh, I'd love to. I really would because I have like so many more questions for you, I'm sure.
Good. And I'm glad that for whatever reason, I really wanted to talk about free will and
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic. Who wouldn't want to
yeah.
talk about freedom? Not a lot of people
Yes.
wouldn't, but you know.
Yes. All right. I will chat you soon.
All right, I'll talk with you soon. Thank you so
Okay.
much. You have a good day.
You too. Laters.